have. So we have had a lot of people talk about the second portion of when is part two coming? When is part two gonna? When can I see part two? I guess everybody just wants to see what's gonna happen with that golden goose. I mean, I don't know. Something about Thomas and the way he expresses his ideas is just amazing.
So he has a great way, and even my dad said it. You know, my dad is trying hard to learn about blockchain. Hi, Dad, if you're watching, or if you are watching eventually. So, and he said that he actually went back and he linked a couple of videos that he had found about EOS, and they were mostly of Thomas Cox. And there's Thomas Cox at the Chicago meetup, and Phil was also there, Phil Mesnier. And Thomas just has a great way of breaking things down simply. He refers to EOS as more of a co-op. You know, you have these shared resources, and everybody's trying to work together to make those resources as valuable as possible. So, and every time he brings up another analogy, like the college football analogy, or the bringing the no food to the potluck dinner kind of thing, you know, I just can't help but crack a smile. So you may see me grin like a goofball here a couple times in this sit-down interview.
I actually attended a potluck this past weekend, and I just didn't have the time to bring something.
Oh no!
And Thomas was in my mind right there. I was like, man, I'm a bad actor.
You're a bad actor. I think it's time to call in an arbitrator and get you out of here.
I apologized to the lady. I was like, I'm sorry, I just didn't bring anything today. So
I'm sorry, I'm a bad actor, ma'am. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm excited. I'd love to watch this video. I need to sit through this again, and it's been a month and a half now, but a lot of this is relevant, and he goes into governing the commons, I believe, a little deeper, which will always be valuable. A lot of folks have started to buy the book. I remember Steve Floyd himself said that he bought the book recently, and he's reading through it. It is valuable. Even though it was written in the 90s, it's extremely applicable to today in blockchain, especially with what we're building with EOS.
Cool. Let's queue up Thomas and let's hear him.
Thomas, we're wondering about arbitration and governance and constitution on the blockchain. Right. And specifically, the constitution we are trying to develop, the arbitration process. Are we looking to design that for all of the chains? A software based on the EOS.io software. Yeah. Will they all have to be subject to the arbitration? Will we be coding some part of the governance into the code itself, or will block.one be doing that?
Wow, great question. We're early enough in our process right now, this is January as we record this, that it's not completely clear what will be baked into core code and what will be at layers that are more either more changeable or in fact left open for the shaping of whoever shows up to that particular chain. And I could say we're fully expecting our software to be used on multiple chains. We expect it to be forked. We expect people to be inspired by it and to use it in lots of ways. And I think our success will come if we, largely from giving people the kind of environment that's very customizable and very rich with potential for them. And having said that, our design goal from the beginning has been to protect life, liberty, and property, and to be a very property rights oriented in our design philosophy. So because blockchains exist across national borders, it can be very hard to get justice. It can be very hard to get fairness and to resolve disputes off the chain. And so we think it's going to be really good for our adoption if we have robust arbitration available in a user configurable way. And so that's what I'm currently thinking, is we're going to have that hooked in pretty low down. I don't know that it'll be mandatory, but I can't imagine why anybody would opt out. Because, I mean, if I don't have arbitration, then how do I settle my dispute with this person who's on the other side of the world and whose actual name I might not know? I think arbitration is probably going to just prove itself to be pretty solid. I know that when we look at the examples that Ostrom studies, I will read these out loud, actually, because they're so good. Graduated sanctions, so that when people break the rules, you can very quickly assess a little fine, and it'll escalate as their badness escalates. Anything from like detention to suspension, you know, by analogy. And conflict resolution mechanisms that are rapid, low cost, and local. So if you are a game player and you're in some game forum that's on a blockchain, and another game player and you are in a fight over, like, well, I own this sword, this token that represents this sword in this game. And no, you don't, because you didn't slay the orc that you said you would, and whatever. It's like, you don't want that going up to some guys who don't even know what your game is. You want one of the other game players who understands the context and the rules and the norms of your culture to be weighing in, because they'll be quicker and it'll seem more fair to both of you. And so having a platform that supports that kind of granularity of decision making and conflict resolution is huge. Because I promise you, no coder on this planet is going to code in advance all the possible disputes and all the possible resolutions that two humans can come up with. We're just too creative.
And that comes up to another question: is how do we come to a consensus on how we modify the Constitution going forward? Right.
So I'll tell you on the coding side real quick. One of the things that's come up very recently in one of our revisions has been a decision to move a lot of what used to be considered core code that would be very hard to change, you'd need a hard fork, to move it up into native contracts. And contracts can be modified. So that means that a lot of the fairly basic behavior of the blockchain, like the fact that it's a 6-month lockup for voting. Well, what if 3/4 of the token holders really like it to be a 4-month lockup or a 9-month lockup, whatever? Well, how do you do that? Do you fork the code, or do you put out a proposal, go through the constitutional modification process? It's a protocol change, and say, I propose changing our protocols to make the token lockup be 4 months or 9 months, or keep it at 6. And then we argue about it, and then there's a vote, and over 30 days or however long you'd need to get people to cast their votes. And then you'd see, oh, here's our winner. Therefore, at block interval X, we'll change that number. And then it would happen. And so is it 3/4, or what's the right supermajority? What's the right length of time? These are all great questions, and these too need to be configurable numbers. Just like I know here in the United States, which is what I'm most familiar with, if you want to change our federal constitution, you need 2/3 of both chambers of Congress and 3/4 of the states to ratify within some 10-year period or something. And okay, but those numbers were made up by the founding fathers who wrote, here's how to amend this constitution. And guess what? If you wanted to amend the rules for amending, you'd write an amendment, and then you'd get 2/3 and 3/4 and blah, blah, blah. Same basic idea. If you want to get really comfortable with this concept of changing the rules, using the rules to change the rules, there's a game called Nomic, N-O-M-I-C. Look it up. It was created by, and I'm forgetting the author of it, but he took over a column that was called Mathematical Games, but he was more beyond math, so he changed the letters around to make it Metamagical Themas. And that was the name of his column. And he invented, or at least published, this game called Nomic, which is a set of rules, and the game is played by changing the rules. And so the entire game is this meta conversation about what our rules are. Like, one of the rules says play goes clockwise. Well, you could change that, but you'd have to change it using the rules of how rules get changed. So it's pretty geeky.
How meta do we get?
How meta do we get? Well, vary in blockchain space, or at least in blockchain governance.
So a proposal for a rule change would have to go over a certain amount of hurdles.
Absolutely. And those initial hurdles will be set in the initial release of the code, but of course it could be changed by a majority or supermajority of the token holders.
And what about a rollback?
What about a rollback? I don't know that there is an on-chain way to agree to a rollback. I think I could be stretching my knowledge here, that the only way to do a hard fork and roll back the state of the chain is to step outside the chain and talk amongst yourselves on the phone and do a hard fork. And then now you got two chains. You got Ethereum and Ethereum Classic now.
Okay.
And our hope, our expectation is that we can minimize the likelihood of that kind of a fork by doing things like allowing contracts to be frozen. So if there's a DAO hack on an EOS-based blockchain, which there could easily be, because if you write a smart contract and there's a bug in it and someone takes advantage of the bug, that's what happened with the DAO, right?
Yeah, right.
But there was no way to stop it there. We do have a facility that we're designing whereby if appropriately authorized people said, there's a problem with this contract, I know I'm the owner, here's a signed whatever, and then 2/3 or 3/4 of block producers say, yeah, I got the same notice you got that the owner of the contract doesn't like his contract anymore and would like it frozen, then a block producer can freeze the contract pretty quickly, but that's all they can do. And then if there's a request to change a contract, that takes a 30-day delay. Currently, it's hard-coded as 30 days, but again, that's configurable. And again, you'd have to, human beings would have to eyeball this and go, yeah, that looks plausible. And you'd still have to pass all the cryptographic tests of, yes, it's signed by the person whose key matches the contract. And you could then replace an active contract sort of against that contract's will. You can also write contracts that are upgradable by nature. You can actually do that, I think, in Ethereum today, is write a contract in such a way that you could issue a new version of it, and then new people coming in would be using the new version over time.
Okay.
So we're all learning about blockchains every day, and we're thinking, oh, how do we avoid that problem? And some of them are hard.
Yeah.
Rollbacks are hard.
And Thomas, we'd like to ask you about, there's a new development you just told us about before starting the camera here, about voting and about staking tokens to vote.
Right.
And there are now 4 different ways.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4, depending on how you count it. So originally, we were just like, there's the EOS token, and you use it to do things. But the exact details of how you use it were originally not as clear as they are today. We're getting clearer all the time. And one of them, I think I mentioned it during an earlier question, is voting for block producers and for protocol changes. Those are big, heavy decisions. They have a big effect on the health of the golden goose. Therefore, when you cast that kind of ballot, your token, you cannot sell your token. You cannot transfer your token for 6 months. So if you made a good choice, then hey, that's a long-term capital gain type situation for you. And if you're like, wow, I just made a vote that's going to harm the entire ecosystem, and I can't leave, it's like, well, then you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
So it's aligning the interests, right? But that's just one of the ways you use your token. And when you lock that token up, it's not available for other things. Or you could use that same token and use it to reserve some bandwidth for yourself. And bandwidth is both CPU and network. They're just one token for one. We use bandwidth to refer to both simultaneously. And you would need at least a little bit of bandwidth available to do transactions, right? And you can get that back over about a 3-day period. So you can only increase your bandwidth once a day.
Okay.
And if you find you need a lot of bandwidth, we've arranged the purchasing scheme. I won't try to describe it now, but let's just take my word for it for the moment, that you're better off making lots of small purchases than one big purchase. It'll be cheaper for you in the long run. And when you then release the excess bandwidth you no longer need, you only get back what you put in. So there's no arbitrage. There's no I'll buy it cheap and sell it expensively and make lots of money. We are rigging it. You can't do it. You just can't. You will always get back exactly what you put in.
And is there a voting that would prefer a particular role of a user on the blockchain? For example, a dApp developer would only use it to stake for resources. And
different
bandwidth.
people will probably choose to use their tokens differently. I mean, an EOS token's an EOS token. But there's 4 ways to exercise it. One is to vote for block producers and protocol changes. One is for bandwidth,
Yes.
right? Another is for memory. So let's say you have a big contract that you load up that you want people to use your smart contract. Well, it takes up space. So in order to take up that space, you need to pay for it. Now, and so you pay a deposit.
Yes.
And as soon as you no longer need that storage, you can say, yeah, I don't need it anymore. And it's deallocated, and you get your token back right away. And so bandwidth, you get it back slowly over a 3-day period. Storage, you just get it back right away.
Okay.
And then there's also a 4th kind that isn't fully fleshed out as of January as we're taping this, around longer-term storage for larger objects. And that's yet a 4th way to use a token, but I'm less clear on how we're going to make that work exactly. You might have to come back and ask again.
Okay. So these are the 4 ways that EOS token has value.
Has utility.
Okay.
Has utility. Remember, you can always exchange a token for hey, I like that phone. Here, let me send you a token. I mean, there's value in use and value in exchange, and I've just described the 4 ways to get value of use on the platform.
Do we see EOS itself becoming a currency?
I don't know how you prevent something from being a currency. People have used cigarettes as currency. They've used cowrie shells. They've used, circles of stone on Gap Island. I mean, it's like humans use all kinds of stuff for currency. So I'm sure there are people maybe watching this now who are already using it as a currency.
Sure.
So I guess probably maybe.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense to me. And I think that moving forward to community governments and working towards developing the governance, since you and Dan and others have been working on this the last few days, what do you now see going forward? What kind of timeline are we looking at? What are the first steps that we can start? For
governance, yeah. So my plan is to write down some of the things I'm saying to you on the EOS Go forum as some posts on things that I'm pretty sure are almost certainly true, and get them challenged, and see what is the minimum number of rules that, the fewest number of rules that you need, but no fewer, to get as far as you can. I'm a big believer in the phenomenon that a few simple rules can give rise to very complex adaptive behavior. And a plethora of complicated rules turns people stupid. And we see that in bureaucracies all the time. It's like, I've got 97 million rules to follow, and therefore I have to, then you end up, people are forced to, write a check for $0 in order to get their account cleared. It's like, hey, that's what the system requires me to ask of you. It's like, this is a stupid system. But if you have simple rules, then you get things like emergent behaviors and fractals and flocking, and really cool stuff can happen with the right basic simple rules.
This is more of an engineering question.
Cool.
But it's something that may play into the governance area. Are there any outside formal or informal audits of smart contract code, and how do we manage that from a developer's perspective, as well as dApps utilizing smart contracts?
Yeah. So what you're asking about is formal verification.
Yes.
And I've been noticing in our crypto universe that formal verification is greatly desired, and it isn't very often used. And that's really sad. The DAO hack and the Parity wallet hack both would have been prevented if they had gone through formal verification, I'm pretty sure. And formal verification is not cheap, and it's not easy. So my prediction is that people who are really good at that will offer their services to DApp developers, saying, hey, for a modest fee, I will perform formal verification on your code and certify it. And I think there are some smart contract languages being developed now that lend themselves to automated formal verification, which I think is a very exciting development.
Do you see the EOS token sort of having a utility to formally verify smart contracts as well too? Is that a possibility?
Oh, there's no way a token's going to do that. No, formal verification is a process.
Okay.
Now, you might pay for it in EOS.
Yeah.
Let's talk briefly about bad actors.
Yep.
How we determine who's acting out of line,
right,
and then how we're going to work on punishing them. I know Dan has spoken before on previous podcasts about how when you have too many consequences, sometimes it will prohibit good behavior. For example, if a block producer is trying to have redundant systems in place, perhaps they might accidentally produce 2 blocks.
Yeah, that's actually a real story. Dan was telling me about it. There was, I think it was on Steam or Steemit, might have been on BitShares. There was a guy, he'd set up 2 machines, redundant machines, and he didn't know they were both on. Of course, they both have the same private key. And so they both thought it was their turn, and they both produced the same block with slightly different ordering, because the order's, not always deterministic. And so was he being like a good guy who's just made an honest mistake? Or is he subverting the blockchain? It's like, well, neither block is worse than the other. And he confessed immediately and said, I'm sorry, dudes, and took the other machine down. So I'd say I wouldn't necessarily find the guy, which is different from, hey, every time Joanne submits transactions and it's your turn to build a block, you ignore all of her transactions and don't process them. do you hate her? Like, what's going on here? That's not fair. And you can, the nice thing about blockchains is they are so transparent, and it is so easy to monitor things. It's one of Ostrom's 8 design elements, is that monitoring must be possible and relatively easy. And blockchains are tremendously easy to monitor. Any kind of Byzantine behavior, truly bad acting by a block producer, it's so easy to prove because they sign everything they do.
Wow. That was interesting, as usual.
Always a mind bender. Yes. Thank you, Thomas, again. And so Thomas is, I like the fact that you brought up a couple of technical questions with him as well. Thomas has a great background. We mentioned this last show, but he started off as a software developer, and he found the human governance side more interesting than the software development side. So he moved towards, he ran for governor of Oregon in 2002 as a libertarian candidate. I believe he got almost 5% of the vote, which is really impressive. And so he has a varied background, and it's always a joy listening to him talk. What were some of your takeaways from the second part?
My main takeaway was that it's, and he used this term in the first video. What's the Constitution that's going to be coming out during the launch is a Constitution et. It's a as least rules as possible type of constitution, and it's up for the community to debate and change that. And I think he's, like he said, he's put in conversations, discussion topics in our forums that he believes are the heavy-hitting issues, and it's up there for debate. So if you guys want to get in a discussion with Thomas, feel free to go to the website or our forums and have that discussion, and the fewest rules as possible. And from that will stem a whole bunch of, like he says, a complex adaptive behavior, all based on those few tenets, those couple tenets. What did you take away, Kevin?
Well, and here's the latest that we have on this, is that block.one will release 2 or maybe more, but at least 2 different models that they're going to offer to the community in terms of constitutions, bare bones constitutions, and then it's up to the community to take whatever one they like and to use that when they launch the blockchain. The Constitution itself will mostly be designed by Dan and Thomas, and I know they bring in outside help as well, designing the Constitution. We just talked to Thomas fairly recently, actually, about we were trying to get some feedback about the block producer report from Thomas, and he helped us a lot there. That's why we're going back to that. That's why we're only asking for the information only. Any links you want to provide, you can send those in to us. You don't have to follow all of the identification and verification processes. Going back to Thomas, so the Constitution itself, and he mentioned this, how it will be modifiable going forward, and that's going to be an important part. The main things are going to be arbitration, and of course that's a big topic that we keep bringing up, but arbitration has to be well thought out. We don't want to modify that process too much after the fact. I mean, certainly we want it to be possible, but ideally you're not trying to make decisions on how you make decisions, right? I mean, that chicken and egg problem that we deal with so much around here lately. But
Kevin, would you be a good arbitrator?
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I could take both sides. I could weigh them. We'll see. I mean, I'm not sure if I'd be the video game arbitrator like he was talking about on the sit down talk. I'm sure there's better candidates for that, but when it comes to anything with EOS, I'm pretty excited. So yeah, bring me in. I'll try to be
arbitration. I think it's a tough position. You have to be fair. You have to consider. You have to listen well.
Yeah, and
you definitely have to get down to the real nuts and bolts and what are the issues that are really resonating with people on each side. Like people may be fighting about it's like people who split up and they're talking about who gets the car and who gets the house and stuff. The deeper issues may be something that if you look at that deeper issue, it may not matter who gets the car or who gets the house. So I think arbitration is just one of those things where you have to get to find out what people really care about, and that's what the arbitrator is doing, is they're is in this process of talking to each side, they're really getting down to what matters to each person.
Yeah, and we know that block producers themselves cannot be arbitrators. They're outside the system, but they do have some power. Of course, there's always being the three heads of power. We have to make sure that everybody's balanced. Thomas, excuse me, there I hit the mic, but Thomas brought up the U.S. Constitution, right? And how back when the U.S. was formed, it was a whole new republic, and they were trying to set a whole new brand of rules for a bunch of freedom fighters kind of thing, right? And I've brought up before how it feels kind of the same way. We're not fighting too much. I mean, Thomas likes to say this is a property-based blockchain. There are no lives at stake here. But at the same time, we have to develop a constitution that is robust and can adapt. And Dan has said before, it has to be a 6th grade reading level so that everybody will want to read it, right? We can't have this page after page of boring terms and conditions that nobody will ever take a look at. So I think they're going on the right track. I'm interested, of course, to see what happens here. So I don't have a specific date. I have not heard when an actual constitution will come out. You heard us ask that in the video as well. And we are still waiting for information. Thomas had a 6-hour talk with Dan, I believe a couple Mondays ago, and about the Constitution, about governance, and they also brought in some outside help then. So they're certainly working hard on that. It's one of the next things to come out.
It's what sets this blockchain. This is the main mechanism which is going to set this blockchain differentiated from other blockchains that don't have this sort of capability. Can we talk about Steam for a little bit and Steemit? Or what if Steemit had arbitration and it had the governance?
Well, there's a couple ways to look at it. So Steam, their issue now is they have a lot of folks who have a lot of tokens, right? Who own a lot of the network, and those folks are not beholden to anybody. And so therefore they may have good intentions at first, but they still have a lot of power, and power corrupts, as they say. So there needs to be some kind of structure in place to prevent potential bad actors, people who have good intentions but eventually have too much power. Now, the reason I mentioned the power is that it will be applicable. The distribution list in EOS is great. As we've talked about, it's one of the best because there's nobody that has more than about 3 or 4%, other than Bitfinex, because they're holding a lot of exchange holders' tokens. Make sure to register your tokens, as Andrew M. likes to say. But there will be eventually, according to Pareto principle, 80% of the resources will be owned by the top 20% of the people who are gathering them. And that's seen all around. And actually, Thomas showed us an interesting thing. He was trying to make a model of block producer pay, and he actually pulled up the population of U.S. cities. And he said, look, this is the Pareto distribution for U.S. cities. You have New York and Los Angeles. And then quickly, and of course, 80% of the population is in those top 20% of cities. And then once you get outside the top 20%, the population numbers dwindle very quickly. So you have New York City, L.A., Houston, and then so on and so forth. Get down to Des Moines, Iowa, and you're working with 1% as opposed to 12 or 13% that New York might have had of the total population of all the cities. Anyway, long story short, eventually resources will be allocated in the top 20%. That's how that works. And there needs to be a good system in place that will prevent any kind of bad acting, prevent taking over the network, and prevent block producers from being taken over by very wealthy parties who might collude and try to gain control of a very lucrative network. There are a lot of systems in place, not just the arbitration process, but there are a lot of reasons why that's not a good idea. And in the video, you heard Thomas talk about that example in BitShares where somebody was it was one of the block producers. They have a different term for it in Steam and BitShares called witnesses.
Yep.
But one of those guys had a redundant server. He was trying to have a good backup server in case his main one went down, and they accidentally both produced a block. And they had a consequence in place, and it kicked him off automatically. It harmed him and he was actually trying to do the right thing. It was just a mistake. So there needs to be a process even for him, someone like him who he didn't do anything wrong, but he needs a way to sort of clear his name and try to get back into being a good citizen again.
We need humans to decide, like intelligent human beings.
Yeah, and code can only do so much. Of course, part of blockchain is smart contracts. We're trying to automate everything as much as possible. but you can only do so much. So for those of you who know Zila and have seen her blog, my cat, she's running around in the background. So if you hear some noises, she's very excited about this live stream. So.
Yeah. I think this governance stuff is fascinating, and I think that it's up to the community to come up with the best practices and not just rely on block.one to do that. Right.
And it's suspected that, of course, these will be basic models that block.one will offer, and it's suspected that there will be additional layers on top of the base layers that block.one offers. For example, we talked about a possible national chain with Korea. They will have their own layers of governance, of course. They may not even have to adopt or want to the governance constitution layers that block.one puts in. So the software being open source and block.one being a software company only, anyone can do what they would like. They can make their own constitution, so on and so forth. So we shall see. And when it comes to the actual main base layer constitution, it sounds like we have a little bit of input. We can help, but mostly it is going to be the block.one team that helps to design that. They have the most experience with blockchains in general. So
cool. Is there anything else, Kevin, that you wanted to talk about with the Thomas interview? I think there's. I personally need to get more reading done on this book. I need to get started and get into it a little bit more personally. Yeah. I need the cliff notes, to be honest.
Hey, well, it's a great book, and I need the same thing. I need the cliff notes as well, and we're all working so hard for EOS itself that sometimes it's hard to take a moment and step back. It is good. A lot of us here, block producer candidates, ourselves, we're trying so hard right now to sort of build EOS and make it the most it can be. Make sure to take a step back, turn off Telegram for a while. I know I need to do that sometimes as well. It certainly helps just to sort of decompress. EOS will be around. It'll be indefinite, if you will.